Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started with the read aloud today. So with the read aloud, one thing to note is the Spirit Bear prompts were on yesterday's post. And another thing with the read alouds, which you guys understand because you guys have experience with, but it's up to you to read the questions ahead of time so that as you're reading, you can watch for the questions that you're looking for. So this is the sequel to Touching Spirit Bear. This is the one that you guys voted on before COVID locked us out of the school, but it's the sequel to Touching Spirit Bear. So think back to reading that, and I'm going to go ahead and start by reading the back and the front. So The Ghost of Spirit Bear: Survival in the Wilderness Was Just the Beginning by Ben Mickelson. In the wilderness, Cole found peace, but this isn't the great outdoors. It's high school. At 15, Cole Matthews faced a prison sentence for slamming another student's head against a sidewalk. To avoid prison, he volunteered for Native American Circle Justice and agreed to a year in exile on a remote Alaskan island. There he was mauled by the legendary Spirit Bear and nearly facing death, but finally found redemption. Now, his banishment over, he has to return home and face the one thing he might not be able to handle: high school. Gangs haunt the hallways, Cole finds violence at every turn, and as the hate-filled school reaches its boiling point, the hibernating rage inside Cole begins to stir. In this tale of urban survival and self-awareness, Cole realizes it's not enough to change himself. He has to change his world. So I'm going to read a few chapters today, and then I'm going to continue doing this every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. It's just meant to be something a little bit easier, give you guys a bit of a break, and hopefully we'll get done towards the end of May. This book is dedicated to all the readers of Touching Spirit Bear who not only read the words with their eyes, but felt the story with their hearts. Every part of a circle is both a beginning and an end, and in a circle, everything is one. Preface. A remote island in southeast Alaska. Cole Matthews' parole officer, Garvey, met him at the cabin door carrying a crowbar. "What's that for?" Cole asked, eyeing him. "To tear down this cabin." "You're not tearing down my cabin," Cole challenged. "I built this thing." "You're right. I'm not. You are," Garvey said, shoving the crowbar into Cole's hands. "The way you destroyed the first one that was built for you." "You're never going to let me forget my mistakes, are you?" Cole said. "I hope you never forget anything that happened out here on the island," Garvey answered. "You built this cabin to protect yourself. Has it done that?" "Yeah, but maybe someone else could use it." "Building this cabin helped build your character," Garvey said. "Maybe the next person needs to build their character too. It's your responsibility to leave this earth the way you found it. You should know better than anybody that you are part of this circle. If you diminish anything around you, you diminish yourself. Land needs to heal the same as people." "How does tearing down a cabin heal the land?" "This cabin isn't a part of nature like the trees and animals. Even without you, the world heals itself by rotting the wood floors and rusting the nails. Winds pry apart the walls, and eventually moss covers the roof." "It's such a waste," Cole persisted. "Only to you. The earth wants back space where she can grow her grasses and feed her creatures again. Animals are afraid of this cabin." "How about our totems?" Cole asked, pointing to the poles he and his friend Peter had planted on the shore above the high tide line. The images they had carved during their isolation here on the island now faced proudly toward the ocean. "The totems can stay. Animals don't fear them." Cole sighed. "Why can't we just burn the cabin?" Garvey shook his head. "That causes pollution. It'll take years for the earth to grow back vegetation where you burnt the first cabin. You killed the microorganisms in the soil." Reluctantly, Cole pried a wall panel loose. It didn't do any good to argue with the Tinglet elder. Things were either right or wrong. Garvey thought everything in life affected everything else in the universe. To him, it was all about choices and consequences. You didn't pick your nose without it having some cosmic effect. Cole glanced down the shoreline to where his friend Peter was loading the lantern, cooking gear, sleeping bags, and other provisions into the aluminum skiff. "You built it, so you tear it down," Garvey said. "Don't be looking to Peter for help." I was just looking, Cole said. Garvey pointed. Anything that won't rot? Plastic, glass, old shingles, tar paper. You'll take back to Drake and bury in the dump. Pull the nails out and carry the planks deep into the forest where they can once again become part of the land. By this time next year, they will have rotted away. Mother Earth takes back quickly what's hers. For 2 hours, Cole worked. Peter and Garvey finished loading supplies, then sat on the rocks by the shoreline talking to each other. When the cabin was removed, Garvey walked over to the ground where it had stood and roughed up the dirt with a shovel. Then he spread leaves and pine needles over the disturbed soil. Again, this place has helped to heal, he said, closing his eyes. His lips moved silently. When he finished, he turned to Cole. Take Peter upstream before we leave. I want you both to soak in the pond and carry the ancestor rocks one more time. It will need to last you a lifetime. Cole called Peter to join him. I'm bringing the atau, Peter said, referring to the woven blanket that Cole had given him. The handmade blanket with its bright red and blue totem images was the same blanket Garvey had given Cole to prove his trust when he first set foot on the island. Before that, it had been passed down through many generations of Tlingit elders. With the atau wrapped around his shoulders, Peter followed Cole as they hiked along the stream. Every few steps, Peter stumbled. Once he fell but refused help getting back up. You won't always be around to help me, he stuttered. Cole slowed his walk. When they reached the quiet pond, they took off their clothes and waded in without hesitation. No longer did the icy water take Cole's breath away. Now he welcomed the piercing chill. Sitting on underwater rocks, he and Peter closed their eyes and breathed in. With each deep breath, Cole imagined himself becoming invisible, not to someone's sight, but quiet enough to fit into all that was around him. The landscape, the air, and the universe, a part of the circle that Garvey always spoke of. Soon a squirrel chased another across a nearby stump. Fish swam within inches of Cole's legs, and bird calls filled the air. These were things he never noticed when his mind was busy. Cole allowed his thoughts to drift. The world was filled with different forces. Good ones, like animals, nature, and healing, had shaped him here. And then there was his old life back in Minnesota, with his parents arguing every night. He remembered his father drinking and stomping around the house, a wild glare in his eye, whiskey strong on his breath, and a belt hanging as a whip from his tight fist. School hadn't been any better with all the bullies. The only way to survive was to fight back. Cole remembered drinking and trying drugs. His parents, who worked all the time, hadn't cared. They probably wouldn't have noticed if he had become an alien. For excitement, Cole began stealing and getting into trouble with the law. One day, Peter Driscoll had ratted on him for breaking into a hardware store, so Cole beat him up and smashed his head against the sidewalk. That brain injury now caused Peter to stutter, stumble, and walk, leaning forward. Cole's parents had refused to post bail when assault and robbery charges were filed. Even now, Cole wondered what would have happened if Garvey hadn't intervened. It was the Tlingit parole officer who had suggested an alternative, called circle justice. Instead of jail, Cole was offered a year's banishment on this remote Alaskan island. The isolation was to be a vision quest of sorts, a search into himself to try to rehabilitate his heart and soul. It was here that a white spirit bear had attacked and nearly killed him. It was here that he had angrily burned down the cabin that had been built for his survival. But it was also here that he had finally reached out and gently touched the spirit bear, finding beauty in life and finding his place in the circle. The year had been hard. After his recovery, Cole had been allowed to return to the island on one condition. He had to build another cabin himself and sell everything he owned to pay for the cost. That was why it had been so hard to tear down his small cabin this morning. Cole breathed deeper and slowed his heartbeat as his thoughts drifted with the breeze that ruffled the pond. Gradually, he forgot that he was a 5 feet, 10-inch troubled teenager from Minneapolis. With each breath, he melted into the landscape around him. He felt no dimension, and he felt no more and no less important than the rock he sat on or the eagle that circled overhead. At moments like this, he knew what Garvey had meant when he had talked about being a part of the circle. Cole felt himself drifting with the clouds, a part of the wind that rustled through the trees. He didn't know how long he had soaked when he finally opened his eyes. He felt a presence and slowly turned his head. Not 50 feet away stood the big white spirit bear, staring at him, its thick coat of bushy hair shimmering in the breeze. The bear stood proudly, its eyes passive but aware. Beside Cole, Peter already sat staring, mesmerized by the huge white creature. The bear must have sensed they were watching him. It turned and vanished effortlessly into the underbrush. "I'm going to miss seeing him," Peter whispered. They sat in silence for a long moment before wading ashore. "Let's carry the ancestor rocks now," Cole murmured as he dried himself and dressed. To speak out loud in the forest seemed disrespectful to nature. Soon they finished dressing. They picked up the large ancestor rocks that they had carried so many times before. Cole carried his with his left arm. His right arm was too weak from his injuries. As he climbed, he thought of the generations of ancestors who had gone before him to bring his life to where it was at this moment. He resolved to make his life count for something when he got back to Minneapolis, so that the lives of his ancestors would not be wasted by his stupidity. At the top of the hill, Cole and Peter set their stones on the ground and gave them a shove. As the rocks tumbled down the slope, Cole imagined all the frustration and anger in his life rolling away. Then, in total silence, he followed Peter back to camp. Garvey was waiting patiently for them beside the boat. "How did it go?" he asked. "We saw the spirit bear," Peter stuttered. "He came right to the pond," Cole added. Garvey smiled. "That's good." "It's kind of sad knowing we'll never see him again," Cole said. "You'll always see him," Garvey said. "Not in Minneapolis," Peter argued. "Yes, you'll always find the spirit bear if you look." So that was the preface of the novel, so that's the prologue of sorts. And some of the things that they were talking about that related to the end of the Touching Spirit Bear book. If you reflect back, Peter wasn't doing so well, and Cole was kind of nearing the end of his healing, I guess is what they refer to it as, and he was told that Peter wasn't doing very well, and Peter was having a hard time, even without worrying about Cole, as Cole was on an isolated island, and Cole decided that he wanted to help. So he actually requested for Peter to go to the island with him, against Peter's parents' wishes. Obviously, they weren't too happy with it, but once Peter got there, Cole and Peter started healing together. Peter was pretty hesitant about it, and he tried to beat Cole up the first day, but as things moved forward, they ended up healing together and mending that broken relationship. So now they're considered friends. This first chapter is going to be 2 weeks later, after they've taken down Cole's cabin and been on the island for the last time. Walking to school the first morning was strange and different. On the island, Cole had hiked the rocky path to the pond each morning at daybreak. Around him had been the sounds of seagulls calling, the screech of owls, and twigs snapping in the underbrush. The pungent smell of pine trees, salt water, and rotting seaweed had filled the air. Sometimes the chuffing sound of killer whales broke the stillness as they breached, and always Cole had felt the hidden eyes of the spirit bear calmly watching him from deep in the trees. Here, walking on a smooth sidewalk in the city, Cole smelled car exhaust. He heard dogs barking, a garbage truck loading trash, and the traffic going by. A siren screamed in the distance. He missed the spirit bear. The city felt like some foreign planet. Cole wanted to cover his ears and close his eyes to it all. He didn't fit into this world. Cole noticed his reflection in the window of a parked car as he walked. He had grown taller and thinner on the island. His skin was weathered and rough, and his muscles had become strong and lean. His old clothes no longer fit him, but he felt uncomfortable in his new ones. As he neared the school, Cole hugged his injured right arm against his waist and tried not to limp. If he let the arm hang, it swung awkwardly because of the bone and muscle damage. He dared not let his injuries show. Around the bullies, he'd be like a wounded rabbit with wolves. Cole blinked back his feelings of fear and frustration. On the island, he had learned to control his emotions. He had learned from Garvey and another Tinglet elder, Edwin, that he could never fully get rid of his anger because it was a memory. And he had also learned to focus on the good. A good day wasn't a day without clouds, but rather a day when he focused on finding the sunlight behind the clouds. Cole wondered if he could keep the same focus back here in the city. The very moment he stepped onto the plane heading for Minneapolis, that concern had begun eating at his gut. What would happen when the island was simply a memory and the spirit bear was only a ghost from his past? What would happen when he returned to the bullies and gangs? The students would remember only the old angry Cole who once prowled the hallways looking for fights. And maybe that old angry Cole still existed, a monster who would only one day return without warning. As he approached the school, the knot tightened in Cole's throat and kept him from swallowing. A statue of the Minneapolis Central Bulldog mascot seemed to snarl at him from its familiar pedestal on the front lawn. The dog had one leg broken off and one ear missing. Cole remembered spraying graffiti on the marble pedestal himself. Now it was tagged with gang symbols, some that Cole no longer recognized. Looking at the ratty bulldog made his memory of the proud and magical spirit bear, seem like a distant dream. Groups of kids hung around outside the school, shoving and slapping at one another and shouting names. Most wore baggy pants and t-shirts. Some wore bandanas or jackets with gang colors. Already, candy wrappers and soda cans littered the lawns. Cole recognized some of the kids, but they seemed like strangers. The cliques and gangs had already begun gathering. The preps, the jocks, the goths, the red groups and the blue groups, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, and a dozen more. Each group eyed the other with disdain and distrust. Cole felt like he was outside a fishbowl looking in. None of it made sense anymore. He had been 15 and in 10th grade when he had beaten up Peter. Now he was coming back at 17, but only starting 11th grade because of the classes he'd missed. He felt a lifetime older. Cole noticed one plain-looking white girl with long, straight brown hair approaching the school. "Hey, loser!" shouted a girl sitting on the steps near the door. The girl kept walking, looking down at the sidewalk. "Look who's calling who a loser!" shouted one of the jocks. "Shut up!" the girl yelled back. "Shut up yourself!" the boy answered. Suddenly Cole wanted to scream. "Stop it! Everybody just shut up!" Garvey's words came back to him. Diminish anything around you, and you diminish yourself. Did these kids know they were destroying themselves with every word? Students who recognized Cole turned and stared openly. His pulse quickened and his face warmed when he heard their whispers. In the past, he would have challenged any kid who dared to stare. Now he drew in a deep breath and lowered his eyes, afraid of what he might do if he was confronted. A familiar voice interrupted Cole's thoughts. "Hey you," Peter called, hurrying over in his stumbling gait. "How are ya?" "Good, how are you doing?" The smile left Peter's face. "2 kids have called me a retard already. I wish we were still on the island. I wanted to go back and soak in the pond." Cole studied his friend's troubled face. The beating and the brain injury had left Peter super emotional. Sometimes he laughed and cried at the same time. Cole remembered Peter's first fights on the island, waking up screaming as if he were still being attacked. With time, his fears had calmed, but Cole worried that those haunted thoughts would return here in the city. Cole knew he was responsible for Peter's injuries, but he also knew he had helped him. After Peter had hurt himself the second time, Cole had suggested that the fearful boy visit the island. He wanted to show Peter that the monster he feared no longer existed. At first, Peter's parents had refused, but in desperation they finally agreed under the condition that Garvey accompany the 2 boys to help protect their son. On the island, Cole had struggled hard to keep Peter to discover that too. And it was a part of something much larger than himself, like a strand woven in a blanket or a brush stroke in a picture. Peter learned to be aware of, but not only focus on, his own self. Standing now on the school grounds, watching the other students, emotions welled up in Cole. A thought kept haunting him. Maybe the monster that Peter once feared still existed. In each class, Cole picked a desk near the back, trying not to be noticed. During lunch, he sat alone, eating slowly, chewing, tasting, and appreciating each mouthful before he swallowed. Kids around him stuffed food in their faces, arguing and complaining. "These hamburgers suck," one girl mumbled. "So do the French fries," another student added. Cole watched kids dump tray after tray of half-eaten food into the garbage can. He wondered how everybody would behave if they had almost starved on an island. What if they had been forced to eat vomit, insects, and mice just to stay alive, as he had? What if they, too, had touched the spirit bearer? An assembly was called for the last period. Cole couldn't find Peter, so he sat alone in the bleachers, ignoring the shouting and shoving. The teachers bunched together against the wall under the mural of vicious bulldog mascots. They visited with one another and ignored the students. On the gym floor, a short, neatly dressed woman stepped up on the podium and tapped the microphone. "Okay, listen up, everyone. I'm Miss Kennedy, the new principal," she said in a monotone as if her voice were a recording. "Hey, witch, you listen up," a student screamed back. The woman pulled the microphone closer. "Welcome. I'm Miss Kennedy, your new principal. I've called this assembly to welcome you back to Minneapolis Central High, home of the proud Bulldogs. I appreciate you being here." "What choice do we have?" another student shouted. The principal droned on over the shouting and laughter. When the assembly finally ended, Cole braced himself for more shoving. A student shouted, "She won't last a week." They were probably right, Cole thought. He spotted Peter leaving school through a side door and ran to catch up with him. "Hey, what do you think of the new principal?" he asked. "I think she'll get munched for lunch." Cole nodded his agreement. "How was your first day?" Peter stared at the sidewalk without answering. "Did more kids trash you?" Peter shrugged. "It's no big deal. How about you?" Cole pretended to be the announcer at a circus. "Come on, come on," he shouted. "See the freak boy who was attacked by a bear." Peter laughed and chimed in. "See the boy who got his head smashed and had to go to Alaska." Cole spoke bitterly. "We're both in trouble when everybody figures out that fighting will send me to jail." Peter wrinkled his forehead. "We have to think like we did on the island, or we'll be both back where we started. I wish we were soaking in the pond right now. We wouldn't have all these problems." "I'll figure out something," Cole said. "If you find a pond, maybe I can figure out how to carry ancestor rocks," Peter said, looking at his watch. "Hey, I gotta get home." Cole watched his friend limp away and then headed for home himself. His mother now worked as an office manager for a trucking company and wouldn't get off work for a couple of hours, so Cole took his time. He had walked several blocks when he found himself passing Fraser's grocery store. Suddenly an idea popped into his head. He used to shop at this store with his mother. Once she had asked the checkout person if they could buy a case of frozen hamburgers for a picnic she was planning with Dad. The man had led them back into a large walk-in freezer where they stored frozen goods. Cole remembered seeing his breath and shivering. That freezer would be like the cold stream. Cole hesitated, then walked inside and asked a tall woman working behind the meat counter, "Can I speak with the manager?" "I'm Betty. I manage the dairy and meat department," the lady said, wiping her hands on a white apron. "Can I help you?" "I have a weird question." "Well, maybe I have a weird answer." "I was sent up to Alaska to stay on an island for a year." "I read about you somewhere," she said. "Didn't you end up spending time with the boy you attacked?" Cole nodded. "We went every morning and soaked in an ice-cold pond to help us clear away our angry thoughts." He picked nervously at a fingernail. "Here we don't have a pond anymore. Could we come and try sitting in your freezer?" The lady laughed with surprise. "You really want to come and just sit in the freezer to get cold?" Cole smiled nervously. "Long enough to clear our minds so we're not angry." "You'll freeze," she joked. Then she studied Cole. "You're serious, aren't you?" "We have to find something like the pond to keep us from getting mad again." "Why don't you just decide to be happy?" "It's not that easy." "Please?" Betty frowned. "This isn't something I want to advertise. Would you come in before school?" Cole nodded. "Okay, I'll put a couple of plastic chairs back there and let you try it." Cole reached over the counter and shook her hand. "Thanks so much. Thanks a million." Cole couldn't wait to tell Peter his idea, so he hiked to the 6 blocks to Peter's house. Hopefully Mr. and Mrs. Driscoll weren't home. They still didn't like seeing him with Peter. Nervously, he knocked. "What are you doing here?" Peter asked when he opened the door, glancing over his shoulder. "Who is it, honey?" called Mrs. Driscoll, walking from the kitchen with a towel in her hand. Her smile faded when she spotted Cole. "Can we help you?" she asked, her voice suddenly guarded. "I know you don't want Peter hanging around me, Mrs. Driscoll," Cole said hesitantly, "but we're friends now. I'm not going to hurt him." You've already done that, she said. What are you doing here? Peter asked again. Cole told Mrs. Driscoll how he and Peter wanted to soak and carry ancestor rocks again. Deliberately, he explained his plan. Sitting in the freezer would be kind of like soaking in the pond, he concluded. Can Peter come with me tomorrow morning? Mrs. Driscoll hesitated. We'll have to discuss this with Peter's father. Mom, you know Dad will say no, Peter said. But he's not always right. Let's just forget it, Cole said. I'll see you in school tomorrow. No, I'll go to the freezer with you, Peter said stubbornly. He turned to his mother. Mom, I'm standing up for myself. You said yourself that was good. Besides, I have an idea too, how we can carry ancestor rocks like on the island. And what's that? She asked. I'll tell you if it works. Cole, do you want to go right now and see my idea? Mrs. Driscoll threw her hands up. Oh, so now you don't even tell me what you're doing? Peter started down the driveway. We will discuss this with your father later, Mrs. Driscoll called. Where are you going? Cole asked as they turned onto the sidewalk. First, to the Salvation Army store. The Salvation Army? Yeah, we have to get our ancestor rocks. A sly smile parted Peter's lips. Curious, Cole followed, walking slowly to match Peter's struggled gait. By the time they reached the Salvation Army store, Peter was nearly exploding with impatience. Aren't you going to ask me what we're using for the ancestor rocks? He said. Cole smiled. You'll tell me when you want to. Bowling balls, Peter announced, barging through the front door. They have a whole mess of bowling balls in the back. Some of the chipped ones are only $1. Cole followed Peter to where a dozen bowling balls had been set against a wall. But there are no hills around here to climb, he said. Peter picked up a ball and headed for the checkout counter. Wanna bet? He said. Chapter 2. Cole carried his bowling ball awkwardly from the store and followed Peter. He felt shame each time Peter stumbled. It was no wonder that Mr. and Mrs. Driscoll still thought of him as some kind of monster. Peter didn't slow until they reached an old abandoned apartment building on a back street. Condemned and keep out notices hung on the outside walls. This is our mountain, Peter declared, entering between the front doors that hung broken and twisted. The signs say keep out, Cole said, following reluctantly. That's just for people without bowling balls, Peter said with a laugh. What if we get caught? That could be getting me into big trouble with Garvey. Caught for what? Peter said as he crossed the lobby to the stairwell. Carrying bowling balls into an old building? We're not robbers. No, we're crazy. Better crazy than lazy, Peter said. He glanced down into the dark basement. I wonder what's down there. I'm not finding out, Cole said. Maybe some other day, Peter said, starting up the stairwell. How many floors are there? Cole asked, adjusting the heavy ball in his good arm. I counted 10 from outside, Peter said, leading the way. As they climbed the dark and musty stairwell, eerie shadows like ghosts fell on the walls. Finally, sweating, they reached the top landing. It was covered with broken glass. Cole glanced back down the stairs. We didn't take much time to think about our ancestors coming up. We'll do that tomorrow, Peter promised. Let's roll our anger away now and get out of here. Cole hesitated. If we roll these bowling balls down the steps, it's going to wreck something. You can't wreck an old building that's already wrecked, Peter argued. What do you want to do? Drop them out the window instead? That's even worse. What if we hit someone? You chicken, Peter said, walking over to a broken window. It's just an empty lot. Nobody's down there. Man, the bowling balls would be going about 1,000,000 miles an hour when they hit. That's the cool part, Peter grinned. With a grunt, he hefted his bowling ball out the window. Cole ran to Peter's side in time to see the ball hit the ground with a dull thud. It actually bounced, Peter laughed. Your turn. You're certified nuts, Cole said, shoving his own bowling ball out the window. Let's get out of here. Quickly, he turned and rushed down the stairs, not waiting to watch his ball hit the ground. As he ran out the front door, Cole half expected to see police cars waiting for them. Let's go get the bowling balls, Peter said, heading around the building. Cole followed, surprised to find the bowling balls had not broken apart. Depressions in the hard ground marked where each had landed. Cole picked up his bowling ball and headed for the street. I'm getting out of here, he said. Let's just leave the bowling balls here, Peter said. Why carry them back and forth each day? Reluctantly, Cole agreed to go back inside where they set the bowling balls under the stairwell. Okay, now let's get out of here, Cole said. This place gives me the creeps. Tomorrow we'll think about our ancestors and close our eyes to imagine our anger falling away, Peter said as they walked toward home. So what time do you want to meet at the grocery store in the morning? School starts at 8, so maybe about 7? Will that be okay with your dad? Nothing's okay with him. Suddenly, Peter pointed. Hey, look! Half a block ahead, Cole saw a flash of white disappear around the side of the building. He glanced at Peter in astonishment. It looked like the spirit bear. Peter nodded in disbelief. Both boys broke into a run. In seconds they rounded the corner, but all they found was an old homeless man standing beside a shopping cart stacked with junk. His beard was choppy, as if it had been trimmed with a knife, and even in the warm fall air he had a ragged white blanket draped over his shoulders. As they watched, the old bum pulled out a piece of wood and began whittling. Suddenly he glanced up and caught them staring. Quickly Cole and Peter retreated around the corner, then stopped and broke out laughing. Geez, it was just some old guy with a white blanket, Peter chuckled. How could we have thought it was a spirit bear? Being in Alaska froze our brains. I better get home, Peter said. I'll see you in the morning, he hesitated. Hey, Cole? What? It's fun being your friend. Later, when his mother got home from work, Cole told her about his plan to sit in the freezer each morning. The lady said we could try it and see if it works. She looked at him dubiously. Can't you get rid of your anger without sitting in a freezer? How do other people do it? Lots of people don't. She hesitated as if struggling with her own thoughts. Just make sure you're no trouble to anyone. It'll be okay, Cole assured her. Seeing the doubt in her eyes, he decided not to tell her about dropping bowling balls out of an abandoned building. She'd really have kittens over that one. He changed the subject. Where does Dad live now? Across town, closer to his job. She took a broom out of the closet, avoiding Cole's gaze. Why? Cole shrugged, just wondering. He never even came to the airport to say goodbye when I left. Is he still mad at me? I have no idea what your father thinks anymore, she said, slamming the closet door. Is the divorce final? It's been final for months now, she said, starting to sweep. I won't stop you from seeing your father if that's what you want, but I don't want to see him myself. He's no longer the man I married 20 years ago. None of us are what we used to be, Cole said, following his mother as she moved through the house, cleaning. Each room flooded Cole's mind with memories and emotions. The laundry room was where his father had turned the belt around and hit him with the buckle end for the first time, but it was also where they once played hide and seek. His mother finally set down the broom. Are you hungry? She asked. You look like a scarecrow. You'd have trouble getting wet in a shower. It wasn't like we didn't have plenty to eat on the island, Cole explained. Eating just wasn't important. Maybe I need to go to an island, she joked, patting her hips. Why don't I fix us a couple of hot dogs? Cole walked ahead of her back into the kitchen. Let me. I want to show you something. Curious, she agreed. Cole did not speak until the hot dogs had finished boiling. As he took them out of the water, he explained, all of life is like these hot dogs. If we cook them simply to stay alive, then that is what happens. If we treat them special and share them, they become a celebration and a feast. Did Garvey teach you that? Cole nodded, sprinkling each hot dog with cheese and garnishing them with diced tomatoes and a pepper. As an afterthought, he lit a candle on the table. His mother took a bite and chewed with a smile. For the first time Cole could remember, he saw pride and respect in her eyes. You really did change on the island, didn't you? She said. Yes, I did. But I don't want you to believe me because I say so. I want you to believe me because now my actions prove it. You're my son, she said quietly. I believe you because I love you. Cole never liked being touched, but he leaned over and hugged his mother. Cole awoke before his alarm sounded the next morning. After a quick breakfast, he headed out. At the grocery store, he met Peter coming from the opposite direction. Must have been okay with your dad, Cole said. He acted like I was trying to do something wrong. He's probably just mad at me. It's more than that, Peter answered. What do you mean? Even before you beat me up, he used to blame me for everything. I never did anything right. Now I really don't make him happy. Why is that? Because now I can't do anything right. You do a lot of things right, Cole said as they entered the grocery store. You boys are here plenty early. I just got here myself, Betty, the dairy manager, said, greeting them. You sure this is okay? Cole asked. Hey, nobody else is waiting to sit in the freezer. Don't give me a chance to change my mind. The door to the cold room was heavy, with brass handles like a bank vault. The handles allowed the door to be opened from both sides. Cole and Peter sat on the plastic chairs, crowded between pallets of shrimp and frozen strawberries. Cole closed his eyes and tried to pretend he was soaking in a cold pond. He peeked and caught Peter peeking back. Breathing in deeply, Cole closed his eyes again and imagined icy water. The freezer air felt good on his skin. He pretended his mind was a calm pond with no waves, but no matter how hard he tried, thoughts of his father left ripples. 15 minutes later, Cole stood stiffly, walked to the door, and pulled on the big brass handle to let himself out. He guessed that Peter would stay a little longer to prove that leaving was his idea. That was what he had often done in Alaska. He would eat an hour after Cole to prove he wasn't hungry when he was really starved. Or he would stay up late, reading and fighting sleep with the lantern on to prove he wasn't tired after a long hike. More than once, Cole had taken a book from Peter's hands and turned off the lantern when he'd found his friend asleep. Cole waited outside the freezer until the big door swung open and Peter came out shivering. We must really be happy now, Peter said. That was tropical compared to the pond, Cole joked. I almost got heat stroke. Yeah, Peter said, rubbing his red arms. This is sunburn. I was sweating the whole time. Thanks, Cole called to Betty as they left. We'll see you tomorrow. Okay, she answered with a wave. I hope you two have a happy day. Maybe we would have world peace if we all put the world leaders in a big freezer each morning. Maybe, Cole allowed. As they walked the half mile to school, Peter seemed lost in thought. Do you really think dropping bowling balls and sitting in a freezer will help us? He asked suddenly. I don't know. Maybe we should carve totems again or try dancing like on the island. We could just go to a school dance. Cole shook his head. That's not the same. Peter agreed. If we danced here like we did on the island, they'd think we were crazy. Remember how you used to run around with your arms out like an eagle? That wasn't as funny as when you used to jump straight up with your chest out like a breaching whale. At least we danced to show what we had learned from the animals, Peter said. Here they just danced to act cool. Cole and Peter were still talking about the island as they reached the front lawn of the school. Suddenly a loud voice behind them shouted, Hey look, it's the Psycho and the Gimp. Cole turned as a gang of 5 boys approached. He recognized several of them. They were the ones who hassled me yesterday, Peter whispered. Keith, the one leading the rest, was a big kid. Cole remembered kicking his butt in a fight or two. Why don't you guys just leave us alone? Peter said. Why don't you shut your face? Keith said, giving Peter a shove. Fear showed in Peter's eyes, and Cole stepped forward. We haven't done anything to you. Leave Peter alone, he said, his hands tightening into fists. Oh, so now you're telling us what to do, said Eddie, a shorter boy with tight curly hair. Bad mistake. Eddie shoved Peter and sent him sprawling to the ground. Cole's heart pounded fast, and his face felt hot. He tried to stay calm, but nothing could control what he was feeling. All his life he had been made to feel helpless. Now, seeing the bullies hurt his defenseless friend, Cole's anger exploded. Your mistake, Eddie, he said, giving the boy a sudden shove that knocked him to the ground beside Peter. Don't fight, Peter screamed. Let them beat me up. Keith turned and punched Cole hard in the stomach. Cole swung back viciously with all his might, catching Keith's face. As he swung a second time, a shrill whistle sounded. The football coach came running across the lawn. Every one of you to the principal's office, he shouted. At first, nobody moved. Now, the coach bellowed. As Cole helped Peter to his feet, he turned. Coach, he pleaded, I was only trying to... Save your excuses, the coach snapped. So at that is the end of Chapter 2. So we are going to start on Chapter 3 next Wednesday, same time at 1 o'clock.